Hi folks, it's Emily coming to you from Bern, Switzerland. I'm in my little apartment here that I've rented while I substitute teach at a beautiful yoga studio down the street for a dear friend of mine who's teaching in other parts of the world for a couple of months. And here in this little apartment, I've created an altar space, and you can kind of see it's just a tiny little space. That I have a tiny little Switzerland's quite expensive, so to get a little apartment, to get a little bit of space was a really lucky thing. And to find a little tiny space within that space that I can come back to every day and contemplate and sit was exciting. And I have my little altar here. You can see there are some little items on it. And the items are those that have a meaning to me. They mean something. They mark moments that I've had over the last year of my travels, or experiences that I've shared with people who gave me the items. So I call those moments and those people to mind more readily when I see these items, and it inspires a sense of gratitude, which is one of the contemplations that I work on in this space. This video is about learning to love sitting, and what I want to do, which I haven't done in the last couple of videos I made, is start with the practicals of sitting and then kind of go into the reasons. And I think the reasons are really motivating, so I hope you'll stick around to listen to them. But the practicals, I think I want to speak about, are really important to having a sit that's successful. And let me clarify that successful is not good or bad. Successful means that you start to experience the different stages of relaxation and detachment from thoughts that make this practice worthwhile in the long run to repeat. So I'm going to go through 3 practical points of having a good sit. The first practical point is finding your seat. So as I showed you when I showed this view, I'm sitting cross-legged, and I want to emphasize the fact that you may not sit like this, and that's okay. And you might need to go get one of those beautiful sitting bolsters. Invest in one of those. They're beautiful sitting cushions, and I highly recommend an investment in one of those if your knees are still off the ground or your hips aren't quite open enough to sit flat on the floor, because it takes some years of cultivating a practice to open up the hips in a way that you can sit for a long period of time and sustain an open chest and a long spine. So go get one of those bolsters, or you can get a seat. I have a seat in here, and I can even show you. Let's come over here. So the seat here, you can sit on the seat. What you want to do is you want to avoid sitting with your back against the seat. So you want to sit straight up and down in the seat. And you can place your hands on your knees when you're sitting in a chair. And that's perfectly fine. You see, there's all kinds of posters and things. I'm renting this room from someone who lives here. So this isn't necessarily my decoration, although he is. So yeah, please don't force yourself to sit like I do, because then you're going to have a very uncomfortable experience that has very little suggestive power to what you could experience when sitting. Find a place where your pelvis and the sit bones at the base of your pelvis can ground into the chair, into the floor, and then experience the spine taking on length. So there's a difference between a straight spine, which doesn't really exist unless it's very unhealthy, or a long spine, which is maintaining its natural curve, and the pressure of the weight of your body is distributed evenly along it, ideally down vertebrae by vertebrae, along its springy shape. And in this case, that gives your back a chance to relax because there's so many different muscle groups all along the spine that are working and taking turns, holding and releasing and holding and releasing throughout the day. So one part of your spine is working to hold you up, and then it takes a break and the another part comes in and works. When you're sitting, it's nice to just have a long spine. You can imagine a little string tied from the crown of the head through the body, midline of the body, down to the pelvic floor. And then imagine kind of sitting in a way that will pull that like a violin string. That's a nice visualization for the way that you can sit. And so that's the first recommendation. Sit with a long spine and with the pelvis in a position that allows the lumbar curve, the lower curve of the back to take its shape, the thoracic curve, and then the cervical curve. So the spine is long. The second practical tip is to sit still. This actually does segue right into the point of working with the mind, because the mind will become very clever and try to think of all kinds of reasons to pull you out of your seat. First, to make you move, to itch your nose, to shift, to move your foot, to do, your foot's falling asleep, so you're going to shift. In the description of this video, you'll see a link to an article that I wrote for Elephant Journal about the monkey mind maneuvers that can pull you out of your seat. And I hope you'll take a look at it, because sitting still is so fundamental to this practice. It's a sit. It's a sit and doing nothing. And it's one of my favorite mentors, Pema Chodron, who I have on my altar here. She talks about how many hours and hours she's done absolutely nothing, and because she's been cultivating her seated practice. And it can scare the mind, like you're not doing anything, you're not worth anything. Like so many things can come up in the mind, so many excuses, like, oh, now you should send that email you just remembered, or oh, well, I forgot to do this, but the point is to sit still. So how do you sit still? First, you make sure that the time you've set aside is absolutely interruption free. Ask somebody to watch the kids. Ask the kids, if they're old enough, to please leave you alone for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Make sure the environment really has no legitimate reason that you should get up, so that if you do get up, you know that it was you responding to your mind and your ego, and not that you set yourself up to fail. Don't respond to it. If it wants you to itch your nose, wait. If it wants you to move your foot, wait. Wait and see. Is it just a call for a reaction? Is it just a call for attention? Or is there a real legitimate reason that you should move? And try very hard not to move. So that's the second point. The third point is when you're working with the mind, what you're doing, especially initially, is delineating yourself from your mind. So you're actually stepping back. You're actually making a first statement to yourself that you are not your mind. You're making a practical statement, not just the memes you read all the time about, oh, your thoughts are things and you're not your mind. And these are great memes, but when you experience something like this, where you're sitting still for 20 minutes, even though your mind is saying, come on, let's do this, and you're continuously saying, we can do it later, and you're continuously being someone other than that voice in your head, you're starting to set up the contrast. You're starting to set up and demonstrate to yourself that you're not your mind. It's really powerful stuff. So yesterday a student came up and said, I don't think I'm doing this right. And I said, oh, what's going on? And she said, well, I'm getting caught up in my thoughts and I don't even know it. And then I find out I was in my thoughts. And I was like, wow, that's great. That sounds like, to me, that's a great sit, because you realized it. You were observing. I got caught up and I went on it. And they're like trains, the thoughts. They come through and you automatically get on that train. And then you're riding it and riding it and riding it and riding it. You can be riding it for 10 minutes and suddenly you're like, I'm on a train. And you can get off that second. Get right off into the now. Pull yourself into the nostrils, into the breath coming in and out. Pull yourself into the sounds, the creaks in the walls. Pull yourself into the sound of the hum of the traffic on the street. Pull yourself into the now. Down into the breath. Into this moment of now. And the mind is like a child. So it's coming up with all of these things it wants you to do, because all of these years you've been doing them. And that's what you do. That's what it does. But now you're changing the relationship every sit you have. So it's not like you want to bastardize it. You don't want to say, oh, it's terrible that I'm having these thoughts. That's ridiculous. You need these thoughts. You need your mind. What we're doing here is creating another layer of sophistication in your life and opening up space. And we open up space during a set, but then that infiltrates our daily life. So I get really excited about these moments in daily life where I'm walking around and somebody cuts me off. And for a moment I just go, how do I want to think about that? And it used to be, honestly, before I started sitting, this is about 4 years ago, before I started sitting regularly, somebody would cut me off. And the first thing through my mind was, what a jerk. Look at what they did to me. Think about that for a second. That person doesn't know who I am. That person is in a hurry. That person is not really that conscious of a person. And they cut me off. Why do I need to make up a story about them doing something to me when they're just doing something? They're actually, according to them, they're just doing something. According to me, they're doing something to me. Do you see there are two different stories going on? And neither of those stories are really, they're imagined. They're taking reality and squeezing it into a story. And Pema Chodron talks about stories all the time, so I'm borrowing that idea from her, but it's very useful. And so instead of going into these stories, now that I've been sitting, I find that in my daily life, I can just stop for a moment and say, wow, okay. I can even say, I hope that person gets where they need to go. And wow, it's a pity they're not able to slow down enough to be aware of other people, but I hope they get where they need to go and be on my way and not hold on to it and not take it personally and not think it's something happening to me. And I save myself so many hormones, because the stress hormones of defense are so expensive for the body to produce. Defending yourself from everything all day long. With this seated practice, what we're doing is we're going in, we're watching the mind, and we start to become keenly aware of the fact that the mind, all the mind is doing is taking information from the past in very selective ways, any part of the past, putting it together in a collage, presenting it to you, and trying to present it to you in the most attractive way possible. So it's almost like a marketing machine. It's like, I want you to think about this, and I want you to get involved in it. I want you to invest all of your mental energy in this. And you're saying, no, I don't want to make that investment anymore, because that's the past. It's the past. It's also just one storyline generated from so many other bits of information from the past. And if it's the future, if it's a worry about the future, if it's a planning of the future, if it's a concern or self-deprecating thought or an attractive fantasy about a great experience you just had with someone or with a group or in your life or a success you've had, All these things are very attractive, and you can just say, not now. Not now. Let me just go inside and just distance myself from all of these thoughts and emotions for a little while and be completely present now. I can go back to those anytime. The magic of this is that when you go into the present tense as a practice, you start to create a contrast between happy, sad, blissful, desperate, any kind of emotions, any kinds of thoughts that you have, and just now, what's really happening now. And that contrast gives you space. It gives you a wisdom. It opens a space for present wisdom to come in instead of past tense grabbing, retrieving, collaging, projecting on the future. See what I mean? So the 3 pointers that I talked about in the beginning are so helpful so that you can start to cultivate this space. And I'm going to emphasize one thing, that the first couple sits will probably feel like, wow, I've never experienced this stuff before, and kind of exciting, or they might be very arduous. But you'll have some sits at the beginning that are great. To stick with this every day, or at least 5 times a week, takes discipline, just like anything else. But I'm going to tell you right now that I've been doing asana since 1998. I started getting to these levels of doing things like circus performers, and a lot of us have. We all come to the studio in the morning and start bending ourselves in all these shapes. But that doesn't change my mind. And it doesn't change my day-to-day experience beyond the fact that I'm more aware of my body and sensitive with my body, which is important. What changes my mind, what changes my nervous system as well, are pranayama and sitting. And pranayama is another video. But sitting is really, really critical to changing the way that you experience life. To cultivate a sense of compassion that you never knew was possible, because you start to understand the value in life lived on its own simple terms, in the present moment. So sitting in a way that you can sit for what I would recommend starting with is 10 minutes, then 15, 20, and working your way to 25. Sitting in a way that you can maintain a long spine posture for that long. Again, if you're sitting in a chair, sit away from the back of the chair with the hands on the knees. Sitting still. And then observing the mind. So setting realistic expectations for what you're able to achieve in your mind in terms of stopping thoughts. You can't stop thoughts. What you're doing here is actually detaching from thoughts long and far enough so that you can allow them to pass. Release your grip on them. Jump off the thought train. You can use visual exercises. I like to help people to imagine that they're sitting inside of a cylinder. Outside, the walls of the cylinder are clear, and then there are fish swimming all around you. You're like in the middle of a cylindrical aquarium, and it's very peaceful, and you can watch the fish and you can say, wow, they're beautiful. Ooh, there's an attractive one. And you can pull yourself away. So the thoughts are like the fish. They are engaging, and you can just imagine yourself just pushing the walls further and further away until there's just spaciousness. The mind might be musical. Mine is very musical. It will try to play a song, and I like to listen to the song. And then I like to say, I'm turning the song off. And I'm listening only to the sounds of the room. And this, to the ego, will be incredibly boring. I'm warning you. The ego will be like, excuse me, but what are we doing? And that's That's the magic of it. You're doing something so important. You're saying we're shutting down for a little while. We're coming right into the now. And in the now, whales are swimming in the sea. Monkeys are swinging from the trees. Cars are running on the freeway. Babies are being born. People are going through life transitions, deaths, births. So much is happening in the now. And we're just in a tiny little area. We can't hear it. We can't sense it with any of our senses, but we can tap into that. So it's a really profound and also a really simple, practical, personal experience. And I hope that this video helps you to begin. Sharon Salzberg in February runs a meditation challenge month, and I'm going to join again this month. This last year I kind of went off track, and I've only been meditating, or sitting, I should say, more correctly is the term, probably 4 to 5 times a week when I used to sit 7 days a week. So I'm going to get back into the 7 days a week in Feb, and I hope you'll join me. I'll find a link to her challenge, and you can also sign up for the blog that they run as well. So with that, I hope I've given you good pointers to sitting, and I wish you a wonderful life and a wonderful new sense of spaciousness if you embark on a seated practice. It's well worth it. Namaste.